Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome and welcome. We are going to be getting started in a minute or two. So just hang in there if y'all are joining us right now. Just stay tuned and we'll be getting started in just a second. Again, welcome, friends. As y'all are joining us, we are just waiting a minute or two for folks to arrive and we will get started. I'm very excited to have you all here. Again, welcome everyone. As you see in the chat as well, the man you kindly put in the chat, we are going to be started in another minute, just waiting for everybody to arrive. And it's awesome to have you all here. All right. We are gonna get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming and joining us today on this happy Monday. And we're super excited to be joining you all and putting this webinar and conversation together on equity beyond income, on-ramping wealth responsive financially in California. We are super excited to be joined by a host of incredible organizations, our colleagues at the HERE Lab, the Institute for College Access and Success, and at Trust West, as well as uAspire. My name is Parshan. I will be facilitating the call today and very excited to welcome you all. Before we start, we'll be now sharing our screen, and I want to confirm that everybody can see the presentation. So give us 1 second as we get that up and running. Awesome. I believe there we go. And here is our presentation. So we wanted to start again, welcome y'all, and start this conversation on why we're having this today, and really, this is a conversation to talk about how we can better make sure that we continue to support our students and our neediest students in this rapidly evolving time. So I am only here to just do a quick intro because we have incredible folks who are going to get into a deep dive. And I want to quickly introduce them. So y'all already met me. We have Dr. Laura Hamilton with the HERE Lab, professor of sociology and co-founder of the Higher Education, Race and Economy, the HERE Lab at UC Merced. We have Jaime Ramirez Mendoza, our senior policy analyst in higher education at Education Trust West. And we have Laura Zalba-Kubitz, senior policy advisor with the Institute for College Access and Success. Welcome, friends. And today we're going to be covering a few topics here, top of the line, talking about efforts to maximize access to existing financial aid by strengthening financial aid application and support and completion, covering college affordability landscape more broadly, including existing equity gaps and opportunities to strengthen state financial aid, and measuring college affordability through the dually disadvantaged lens that considers wealth in addition to income. So without further ado, we are going to get us right going and started. One more plug for uAspire. We are a national nonprofit that improves the economic mobility of underrepresented students by creating financial solutions to diverse post-secondary pathways. And I'm very excited to welcome Jaime, who is my partner in crime in a lot of the good work that we're doing with the Financial Aid for All Coalition. So Jaime, welcome. We'll pass the baton to you.
Awesome. Gracias, Parshan. As Parshan mentioned, my name is Jaime Arithi Pronouns, and I'm at Trust West. And for the past 25 years, we have been an unapologetic voice for educational justice. And we are a research, policy, and advocacy organization whose mission is committed to advancing policies and practices that dismantle the racial and economic barriers embedded within California education systems. And we prioritize students of color and multilingual learners. As Parshan mentioned, we co-lead the Financial Aid for All Coalition with uAspire. And yeah, that was just a little bit about our organizations. Next slide. So to begin, let's define what we mean by when we say universal FAFSA policies. These policies are designed to ensure that all high school seniors complete the FAFSA or state application when applicable. So in our case, that's the California Dream Act application. And typically these policies have an option for families to opt out. In some states, this policy is tied to graduation requirements, while in others, it's a strong expectation supported by schools. But nonetheless, the goal is the same, to help make sure every student has a fair shot at accessing financial aid. And access to financial aid resources matters, not just because it's a strong indicator of whether students continue on their education after high school, but it's an investment that pays dividends. With one analysis finding that for every $1 invested in college students, California gets over 4 times the return. However, not all students know what federal, state, or institutional aid is available to them because many don't apply to find out. For instance, in 2021, before California's universal policy, only 53% of California high school students completed the FAFSA. And this results in large sums of money of financial aid left on the table, where approximately 550 million remains unclaimed in California each year. And access to these resources is key. If we can go to the next slide, as financial aid is often framed as a gateway into and through college, with decades of research showing how it can expand access, it can support persistence, and improve student success across various student demographics, while also helping streamline entry into benefits such as CalFresh. Next slide. And California has a long history of protecting and expanding financial aid. And here we just have a very, very condensed timeline of some milestones over the last 2 decades. So for instance, in 2001, undocumented students became eligible to pay in-state tuition. And about 10 years later, the California Dream Act application was established, allowing undocumented individuals to access state financial aid. Around the same time, Riverside County started their Race to Submit challenge to increase its aid completion rates, while Trust West created a dashboard to track completion rates across the state. And these efforts led to CSAC launching the Race to Submit dashboard in 2013. About 4 years later, in 2017, Valverde Unified in California became the first school district with a local mandate on FAFSA K to completion. And leveraging the benefits of this local mandate, Trust West and partners attempted to pass a universal policy in 2019, but fell short of the votes. We quickly recovered, learned from this experience, and reaped some major wins in 2021, where we sponsored and advocated for the passage of AB 469, establishing the universal statewide mandate. And within this year, we also advocated for SB 737 to update CalSA to include supports for financial aid application completion, while the Community College Entitlement Grant was created to serve thousands of additional community college students. On top of that, to help guide the implementation of the mandate, uAspire led efforts to pilot it at 4 Bay Area high schools. Then in 2021, CSAC launched their All In for Financial Aid campaign, which provided resources to practitioners and families. The Financial Aid for All website was launched to support districts with implementation, and the Cal Grant Reform Act was enacted contingent on state funding. Now, I want to hone in on California's universal FAFSA K policy, because AB 469, along with the Budget Act of 2021, required local education agencies, or LEAs, which include school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools, to confirm all 12th graders completed the FAFSA unless students opted out of the requirement. And importantly, this policy puts the onus on the LEAs and not the student. It also required data sharing agreements so that school districts had the most up-to-date information to verify which students had submitted an application and which ones had not. And in 2025, AB 469 related costs for school districts could be funded through block grants via the California Department of Education. Around the passage of the Universal FAFSA, the Financial Relief for All Coalition was born. And the goal of this coalition was to learn more about both the challenges and best practices from the field on financial aid completion support, while providing tailored resources to implement the policy across the state. And this led to a statewide coordination across various stakeholders. And as a group, we continue to advocate for policies and budget efforts to increase aid across California. So, what did we learn a year after implementation of the Universal FAFSA policy? We actually saw the policy pay major dividends right away, where by March 2nd, there was nearly an 80% increase in FAFSA completion from the previous year. And by September, nearly 3 in 4 high school graduates had completed the FAFSA. And importantly, the share of students submitting a financial aid application increased across all racial and ethnic groups between this year. And there are some nuances. So for instance, while the rate at which Black students completed the FAFSA increased 5 percentage points, they remain less likely to complete an application compared to their peers. And since 2023, there has been some progress made in California, where if you go to the next slide, according to the NCAN tracker, the state currently ranks third in the nation in completion rates, and a PPIC report found that the policy contributed to an increase of an additional 1,500 students enrolling in college. And again, more work still remains. For instance, there is a dire need to focus on increasing CADA completion and tackling the regional completion gaps across the state. Lastly, California has an ambitious goal of reaching 80% completion rate by 2030, so it's critical that the state maintains forward progress rather than creeping backwards from that goal. And with that, I'll pass it over to my colega Laura from TICAS, because I understand we have two Lauras.
Thank you so much, Jaime. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Szabo-Kubitz, and I'm Senior Policy Advisor at TICAS, where we work nationally and in states like California to increase awareness and reduce the burden of student loan debt, improve access to available financial aid, strengthen need-based grant programs, and close college affordability gaps, and protect students, borrowers, and taxpayers. And apologies, everyone, I'm a little hoarse, so hopefully you can hear me okay. Our efforts to strengthen college affordability focus on students' total college costs, which are majority non-tuition, including living expenses and basic needs, across all 3 of California's public higher education segments. Taking a look at the next slide at public colleges and universities in the San Francisco East Bay area, despite differences in tuition and fees, non-tuition costs are similar across all 3 institutions and compose the vast majority of students' total annual expenses. However, despite similar total college costs, once non-tuition costs are factored in, for the lowest income students, the net costs, or what students must pay out of pocket after available grant aid, are the most burdensome at community colleges, where under-resourced students tend to receive less financial aid, in part due to how state aid programs are currently structured. Notably, while net price may decrease along with family income, it makes up a larger share of low-income students' family income. The lowest income students at California public higher education institutions have to put up to 50% of their family income towards covering total college costs, and this is after taking advantage of available grant aid. One of the greatest implications of college unaffordability has been widespread basic needs insecurity among the state students, with two-thirds of California students facing food insecurity and 53% facing housing insecurity. Students who are parents, African American, Latino, older, such as 24 and up, and lowest income, are among those most likely to face basic needs insecurity. Over the years, TICAS has collaborated with our great partners at the Statewide Student Association, CSSA, UCSA, the SSCCC, to better understand the affordability challenges faced by California students. And in the last few years, we have co-released updated reports on students' debt and employment burdens. While very few community college students take out federal loans, the vast majority of those who do are very low income. 85%, in fact, were Pell Grant recipients. And data shows disproportionate burdens by race, with Black students who, despite composing 5% of enrollment, compose 20% of community college student borrowers. At the CSU, while overall borrowing rates have declined in recent years, which is to be commended, historically marginalized racial groups are still more likely to have borrowed student loans, with Black students the most likely to have borrowed at 63%. Additionally, more than 60% of all borrowers come from families with incomes no greater than $45,000 a year. Excuse me, $54,000 a year. We see similar trends with UC students, where the likelihood of borrowing increases as family income decreases. And students of color are more likely to borrow, with 2/3 of Black students the most likely to have taken out loans to cover college costs. I do also want to give a shout out to UC as well, that like CSU, overall borrowing rates have decreased in the last few years. But again, there are persisting uh, inequities that we're seeing that should be addressed. In addition to borrowing loans, many students work to help cover the college affordability gap. Despite research showing that working more than 15 to 20 hours per week can negatively impact academic success, the majority of students across all segments work at least 21 hours a week. This rises to more than 2/3 of community college students, specifically, who, despite low borrowing rates, face substantial affordability challenges and must turn to long work hours to cover college costs. While California has made notable strides in recent years in increasing access to existing financial aid, as my colleague Jaime was talking about, as well as in strengthening need-based financial aid, such as removing age eligibility barriers for Cal Grant applicants at community colleges, there remain persisting structural issues that limit both the number of students who receive need-based financial aid and the amount they receive. For example, the Cal Grant B Access Award that helps the state's lowest income students pay for critical non-tuition expenses, such as housing and food, which can exceed $30,000 a year, has dramatically lost value over the decades. At a maximum today of $1,648, the award would be close to $9,000 today had it kept pace with inflation. Among the actions policymakers can take to ensure all Californians have the support they need to earn higher education credentials is indexing the Cal Grant B Access Awards to inflation moving forward, as SB 1006 by State Senator Padilla would do. Importantly, this bill, which is co-sponsored by TICAS and our partners at Children Now, EdTrust West, and Public Advocates, would also index the supplemental awards of Cal Grant B recipients who are student parents and recent foster youth, who often face additional affordability barriers. As this bill moves through the legislature, advocates are also asking lawmakers to include funding for it in the state budget. When persisting college affordability challenges are sufficiently addressed, Californians will be able to attend high-quality institutions with robust support systems that facilitate success, with little or no need to work or take on student debt while attending full-time, earning a credential efficiently, and seamlessly transitioning to a well-paying job that supports them and their families. Doing so will require targeted policies like SB 1006 that strengthen need-based financial aid, as well as continued exploration of approaches that consider additional factors of wealth, which my colleague Dr. Laura Hamilton from UC Merced's HERE Lab will speak to next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. As Parshawn noted, my name is Laura Hamilton, and I am the co-founder of the Higher Education, Race, and the Economy, or HERE Lab at the University of California, Merced. With TICAS, my team and I have been working to develop policy solutions around addressing wealth inequality through California's student aid systems. Next slide, please. First, I want to start with definitions for two important terms, income and wealth. Income or current earnings within a time frame is often an insufficient resource for funding college. It's used to cover immediate needs for housing, food, and medical care, and little may be left over at the end of a typical month. Consequently, post-secondary attendance often hinges on students' access to wealth, typically through their families. Wealth includes assets such as savings, investments, real estate, and business revenue, minus debts. It's directly transmitted intergenerationally, meaning that families who have savings and other assets pass them on to their children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren. Once assets begin to accrue, they tend to accumulate rapidly as access to wealth increases opportunities to grow wealth. By contrast, those with no measurable assets face severe barriers to wealth acquisition. Next slide, please. Wealth gaps in California far exceed income gaps. While those at the 80th percentile of annual income have 3.2 times the income of those at the 20th percentile, those at the 80th percentile of wealth have 108 times the net worth of those at the 20th percentile. Next slide. Most wealth is concentrated in the coastal areas of our state, which are shaped by the tech industry. You can see these areas in the lighter blue and turquoise. Inland farming communities such as those around my home, the San Joaquin Valley, along with urban Los Angeles, have the lowest median net worth. And you can see these areas in the darker gray. Next slide. How might we better integrate wealth into our calculations of financial aid? Well, conveniently, the FAFSA already collects a wide array of information on student and family assets. These include money and cash savings, checking accounts, time deposits, money market funds, net worth of businesses or investment firms, real estate, excluding the primary residence, vacation homes and income producing property, trusts, stocks, bonds, derivatives, securities, mutual funds, and tax shelters, and qualified educational benefits or education savings accounts. Next slide. Notably, FAFSA does not collect data on home equity and retirement savings, so the value of FAFSA counted assets are lower than the value of all household assets. However, in our work, we've shown that the distribution of FAFSA counted asset values has strikingly similar structural characteristics as the distribution of total household assets and total household net worth. That is, while FAFSA counted assets do not total all of the assets a household owns, they do a good job of identifying a household's relative position to other households. Households that have some home equity and retirement savings tend to have the other assets included in the FAFSA, while those who do not have home equity or retirement savings do not have FAFSA counted assets. In addition, FAFSA does not request information on debts. However, debt can be misleading in part because wealthier families tend to have access to strong credit and high amounts of what is considered to be good debt, such as for real estate, property, and vehicles with favorable repayment terms. Next slide. If we utilize both asset and income information from the FAFSA, we can imagine economic need in California as multidimensional. After all, a family's ability to afford college is a function of their access to both wealth and income. Let's take a look at this pie chart of a representative sample of FAFSA filers in California in 2019 through 2020. Note that FAFSA filers are more disadvantaged than the entire college-going population, as those with greater resources are far less likely to complete the FAFSA. Among these FAFSA filers, some families are neither disadvantaged by low wealth or very low income. This represents around 1/4 of the sample in the lime pie slice. Families may be disadvantaged by low income only, as you see in the orange slice of the pie, or they could be disadvantaged by low wealth only, just over 40% of the sample, and the teal is low wealth. I want you to focus on the yellow 23%, or the group of students who are both low income and low wealth. We refer to these students as dually disadvantaged. The dually disadvantaged are different than their peers who have similar levels of income but more family wealth. Next slide. California financial aid systems typically do not serve dually disadvantaged students well. One way that we can tell that the dually disadvantaged One way that we can tell this is that the dually disadvantaged receive nearly the same amount of state aid relative to students who are singly disadvantaged by income despite greater need. Because the dually disadvantaged have greater need that is not being met by need-based programs in California, they borrow over $1,000 more annually than their low-income peers who have some access to wealth. This debt burden for the dually disadvantaged can have serious consequences. These students face the lowest college access and completion rates in the state. The dually disadvantaged are struggling in part because their extra need is largely invisible in our formulas. Next slide. So California financial aid ends up failing the dually disadvantaged because wealth inequality is inadequately addressed. There are several reasons that this is the case. However, one major factor is the use of relatively high asset ceilings with both the Cal Grant and the middle class scholarship. These asset ceilings are there to exclude high wealth students, and to an extent they do so. However, asset ceilings are not asset floors. Our programs do not send more aid to qualifying students who are not just low income, but are also low wealth. Dually disadvantaged students and middle class students with little to no wealth are simply overlooked in California. Next slide. How could our financial aid systems target dually disadvantaged students? One possible model here is a $5,000 access award provided to dually disadvantaged students. We modeled this after the Students with Dependent Children grant, which provides up to $6,000 in access costs for qualifying Cal Grant recipients who have dependent children under 18. We used existing data to simulate the possible costs and benefits of such a supplemental grant. If California awarded a $5,000 grant to dually disadvantaged students in one cohort of first-time in-state students, 4,500 new college graduates would be induced. The estimated $200 million cost of this grant in California would be more than offset by the nearly $1 billion boost in state GDP. The grant would pay for itself more than 4 times over. Next slide, please. Our second policy suggestion focuses on the middle class scholarship. The purpose of the MCS has been to reduce borrowing and excessive work for pay among middle class and now low income families. If we revise the program to more fully consider both family income and wealth, then we have a better picture of students' financial resources and can pinpoint students who are more likely to struggle without more support. The MCS could target dually disadvantaged and low wealth middle class students with a much lower asset ceiling to ensure that students being supported by the middle class scholarship are those whose family resources are most likely to fall short. And at this juncture, I will move us to the Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. And this was super, super awesome. We now have an opportunity for folks to ask your questions. There is one question that has been posed, and I want to welcome our panelists to answer that. Can you describe dually disadvantaged in terms of what they report on the FAFSA and contrast that with the other groups?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that question. So dually disadvantaged students, as we define them, are students that report zero assets on the wealth side. So these are students that are not reporting any assets, and there are quite a few students in California who have zero assets, but they are also low income. The bar that we used for low income is actually extremely low. We use the bottom third of folks' reported income on the FAFSA, which in California is lower than the national average at just below 17,000. So to be dually disadvantaged, you have to have both zero assets and have this very low income.
Thank you for that. And I see Laura jumping on as well. Don't know if you want to add to that, Laura.
Oh, no, I was just coming on for the Q&A, but thank you.
Got it. Yes, no worries. Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Very well defined. Hope that answered the question. I think I want to ask a question from the panelists very quickly here. We covered a few different potential ways that we could start to move in this direction of being wealth conscious in the way that we do this work. A question that I have for folks is what are some other um, processes or industries or issues that we need to take into account as far as things that are happening in the broader perspective and broader picture? What are some opportunities that we have to engage in this issue area and on this front? Um, I don't know if anyone wants to touch on that.
Well,
So
I'm in
go
true
ahead.
sociologist fashion. I'm probably not going to think about this as much as opportunities as I am going to think about why the need to address low wealth students is so important. When we created our financial aid systems in the United States, particularly at the federal level, and states tended to follow, we were looking at a really different situation than today. So wealth inequality in the United States in the 2025 is radically different than it was in 1970. And so we didn't envision that the gap between folks on wealth would be as extreme as it is now, far more extreme than it is around income. And so we're in the situation where we're needing to really shift our conversation to recognize this additional dimension of inequality that hasn't been part of the conversations around financial aid. And it may actually be one of the factors that are driving some of the inequalities that Laura was sharing, for example, around race in our state. Given that there have been huge barriers to intergenerational wealth transfer in the United States for Black and Latin families. So wealth is also a dimension that increasingly we have more knowledge about its role in shaping other inequalities.
I think the only thing I'll add to that is more so of like a personal take on, I think the differences between the wealth and income, right? I think there's been plenty of research that shows historically systemic reasons as to why the racial income gap is the way it is. And the racial wealth gap is actually bigger than the income. And our current systems just focus on income. So I'll give you an example. When I was in high school, it was me and my homie Jared. My homie Jared was a low income white student. I was also a low income Latinx student. We both qualified for the same things: Pell Grant, Cal Grant. We got some institutional aid. The difference was, my parents don't have a retirement. My parents didn't own a home. We're a first generation family. Whereas Jared, even though we were from the same income bracket, he did have grandparents who own their home, who own land, right? So his grandparents were able to support him a little differently in regards to his post-secondary pursuits. Whereas for myself, I didn't have the same financial resources or buffer as my friend Jared. But in our current system, we only take account mostly the income portion of it, but not necessarily the wealth. So hopefully that helps some folks kind of distinguish the differences. It's not one or the other. It's almost like this additional lens that I think the affordability space has talked for a long time, and yet it's taken a while for it to catch up within the methodology of how we capture what is considered by need.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hampton and Jaime. Appreciate y'all. I see another question in the chat. So can you describe how what is being proposed is different from the federal methodology? For example, the low asset, low income family should have the lowest student aid index. Is what you think needs to happen uh, take place outside the cost of attendance minus SAI framework? So is this something in addition to that, on top of that, separate from that?
I'm happy to start with talking just sort of about from the perspective of like state financial aid programs, and then I, defer to Dr. Hamilton to kind of fill in some of the gaps around the federal methodology. But I think the idea is that right now, like when you're looking at middle class scholarship, for example, or Cal Grant program, there are asset ceilings. So if you're applying, you're not eligible for those programs if you go above those ceilings. But it's not there's not like it's not refined under those ceilings, right? And so the idea would be, is there a way to, when awarding and targeting need-based financial aid, is there a way to better target the dollars to students based on different factors of wealth, as opposed to kind of saying, if you make up to, 234,000 middle class scholarship and your assets are at that level, then you are eligible. But I'll defer to Laura to share more about that.
Yeah, and just piggybacking off of that, I think the general approach to wealth in financial aid has been like, let's not let wealthy people get financial aid, but not let's figure out how to help students who have limited wealth get financial aid. Because I think Jaime's example was really great between him and his friend. Jaime's family needed more, but they got the same amount of aid, and that ends up showing up in more borrowing, more working for excessive hours, and often an inability to attend college or complete college. In terms of how wealth is taken account into the federal formulas, the wealth is very little consideration. We have all of this information in the FAFSA. But in terms of how it's translated into the student aid index, only 5.64% of assets that we count in the FAFSA are actually included in the student aid index. So you could have a $200,000 529 educational savings account that would be enough to send your child through 4 years at a UC in the state of California. And only about $12,000 of that would get imported into your SAI. So you'd only have $12,000 more or higher SAI than a student who was similar on every other dimension but had no assets. We take that SAI and we utilize that in various ways in our financial aid systems. And then on top of that, we have these asset ceilings, but not attention to targeting the students who are the lowest wealth. So that's how they're related to each other.
Thank you, friends. One more similar sort of but different issue area, but similar question that was posed in the questions here is, the topic of middle class scholarship and sort of how do we, can you speak a little more about the program and how refining it could help better account for wealth and would shift the program within its current recipient income parameters? So I think, what would that look like if we were to want to better account for wealth-based uh, pieces into the MCS? What would that look like?
I'm happy. Oh, Laura, did you want to go? I'm happy to start it off if you want. So I think, the middle class scholarship is really interesting, right? Because, it looks at college affordability through the lens of total college costs, which is really important, right? I was talking a lot earlier about looking at the non-tuition costs, which make up the majority of college costs for most California students. But of course, the devil is in the details, and we know, for example, that like community college students, unless they're in limited BA programs, they can't access the middle class scholarship. We know that while many low income students do get a middle class scholarship because it is a last dollar program, wealthier applicants tend to receive larger awards. There's also an element of middle class scholarship where for students who come from families that make above $100,000 a year, the formula for determining the award size only has to take into account 1/3 of a student's student aid index. So essentially, it's protecting 2/3 of that SAI for that family. So there are, I think, ways that the program could be refined to better target the state's least resource students, bringing in community college students, not having this sort of unequal SAI protection. If there's a way to provide a greater share of unmet need coverage for lower income students. But I'll turn it over to Dr. Hamilton to share more about kind of the individual wealth factors.
Actually, that was a really helpful answer with regards to the technical features of the MCS. I think all I want to do is remind people about some of the original purposes of the MCS is like recognizing that, for before they opened it up to more low wealth, low income students, that our Cal Grant wasn't covering the needs of some students. And that we want to make sure that we bring and give support to students who are going to be most impacted by high borrowing and working longer hours. So if we think about it through that lens, when you're looking at a pool of students who don't have the wealth support, whether they're low income students and thus are duly disadvantaged, or whether they're middle class students by income but have no wealth, they're going to be the students that are going to be most impacted because they won't have any resources to draw upon. And so when we're thinking about revising it, the suggestions that Laura gave help us to make sure that those dollars are being more adequately targeted to the students that don't have those reserves.
Thank you, Dr. Hampton and Laura Zabkowitz, for your great insights into this question. For the next question, I'm going to maybe start with Jaime, if that's okay, and then pass it to the rest of the panelists. So, question posed here asks, does the definition of dually disadvantaged account for students who start at a community college and then subsequently transfer into a CSU or a UC institution?
Yeah, happy to start and pass it over to Dr. Hamilton, especially in regards to the methodology. Short answer, yes. I mean, there's different, depending on how states or institutions or agencies would want to tackle gaining the data on wealth, right? Whether that's national scan, whether that's just taken from the FAFSA, whether that's an additional one page, whatever the case may be. All it should really depend on is whether that student completed the financial aid application in some senses, right? Because that will essentially get their income information and some of their wealth information to then make that calculation. So it's less about where they start in the segments and more about, are they completing the applications with the information necessary for then the state agency to calculate, okay, is this person low income, low wealth? Is this person low income, mid wealth, or vice versa? But I'll pass over to Dr. Hamilton in case I butchered any of the methodology stuff.
No, that's totally correct. Dually disadvantaged students exist in every segment, and we've, in our research, identified, we can break that down. The pie chart I showed you, I could break that down and show you what it looks like at community colleges and what it looks like at four-year schools in California. And what I will say is that, not surprisingly, a larger share of the community college student population is dually disadvantaged. And so I think that, kind of also hits on some of the things that Laura was showing us with community college students really not receiving enough support for their needs. If we consider that many of these students are also dually disadvantaged and don't have any access to wealth, that kind of helps explain what's going on there.
Super helpful. And Dr. Hampton, there is relatedly another question that was posed in the chat for you. Uh, Following up on your comments about the 529 accounts, one of the audience folks is asking, there is a current proposed bill this year that would exclude investments into 529 accounts from gross income for tax purposes. Do you have any insight on how this sort of effort would impact the proposal on dually disadvantaged? Or any thoughts in general? I'm not sure, by the way, what whoever put that question in the chat. I don't know what bill it is. Would love to see the bill number if y'all could send it always. But without knowing what it is, generally speaking, you mentioned this note around 529s and the way they're being calculated into SAI is not really at you know accurate and adequately capturing the total wealth that a student is coming with. So what are your thoughts generally on any efforts that would exempt that from the tax filing purposes?
Yeah, so I think that efforts to exempt that from counting in the filing of the AGI are further sort of evidence of a variety of ways that people who have assets can kind of hide those assets from calculation. But setting that aside, it actually isn't going to impact the calculation of dually disadvantaged much because unless the FAFSA changes what they count as assets, unless they take that off of the report of assets, then that information is going to be included in assets, and it should be right, because if the idea is do these families have the resources to pay for their students' college and they have a 529, that is part of your answer. The answer is yes. And sometimes people say to me, well, isn't that disincentivizing people to save for college? And the answer is no, because the thing about wealth is that when you accrue it, it goes somewhere. So you could put that into 529, or you could put that in investment, another kind of investment. But people aren't going to necessarily going to be able to hide uh, these assets in some other way.
Here, here. Thank you, Dr. H. Um, so another question that has popped up is on the trade-offs, right? And I really feel with this question, we hear this a lot from a lot of our financial aid advisors on the ground and institution partners too. So this question is asking, how do you think about the trade-offs between gathering more information to better target financial aid, for example, additional application, and that of the administrative barriers for students? We've struggled with that trade-off for years in financial aid. So, Jaime, I don't know, maybe we'll go to you first and then to the rest of the folks.
Yes, and I'll try to be as succinct as possible. My dissertation topic was actually on administrative burdens within FAFSA and CADA. So I can talk about this for way too long that I'd like to admit. But that being said, it really is a major trade-off. And I think one is like acknowledging that. And then two, it's like, who are we centering? Are we centering the compliance of the financial aid system? Or are we centering students? And granted, some of that is going to be both and, right? Like there's a lot of compliance, both institutionally, statewide, and federally. And it's like twofold. What systems are in place that we can build upon? And what is not in place that we can streamline, right? Because it's almost like the trade-off is, yes, you might ask for additional financial aid information, but is that embedded within web grants, for example? Or is it a completely different process? Is it paper? Is it electronic? I think, at least for me, as a researcher, piloting always helps. You kind of work out the kinks here and there, and then you're like, oh, wow, we thought this would work this way, but it's actually better this way, right? So I think for me, it's key to acknowledge the trade-offs and with the benefits of what $5,000 could have done for a student like myself when I was enrolled in college, right? Is an extra 10, 15 minutes on an electronic, on an electronic submission for an application worth that potential $5,000 for me to be able to continue going to school. So again, I think it's going to be a critical conversation both amongst the systems and expanding the infrastructure because financial aid officers are often overworked and understaffed. So it's like, yes, we would want systemic solutions, but on the other end, it's like, okay, is the human capital in place as well? So those trade-offs aren't felt by the students and more so borne by the institutions. But I'll stop there and pass it over to Dr. Hamilton and Laura for y'all's thoughts.
I just want to say, yeah, I totally agree with the importance of keeping administrative burden for students down. Um, the identification of dually disadvantaged students shouldn't add any additional burden on students because the information is already in the FAFSA. Now, there are some students who don't report their assets because their income is so low that that's exempt. But it would be quite simple to add an attestation, like, can you attest that your family's assets are below blank, which is what is used to allow access to a simplified FAFSA in the first place. You could just simply add one question. So it, for most people, wouldn't add any burden. And for the population for whom this might need to be an additional question, we're talking about a singular additional question. But the infrastructure would definitely need to develop on the state side to make sure that we can process this information and utilize it appropriately.
And Laura, I want to make sure you have an opportunity if you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I echo what both of my colleagues just said, and also would just say, I mean, I don't have, a fully fledged proposal here, but I do want to note that a lot of times in programs there's sort of like a cliff effect of assets or wealth as opposed to like more of sort of a graduated table where people who have less wealth get larger awards. And so I think just kind of like taking time to think about how those might be reimagined is a worthwhile exercise.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. To close us off, I'm going to ask one question from each of the panelists, which would be remiss if we did not ask. We are in a new era to begin this year with a new governor that is set to take place after Governor Newsom leaves office in November. And this is dawn of a new age, 8 more years, 4 more years, maybe 8 more years of a new governor coming in. And often that is seen as an opportunity for new policies, new efforts, new issues. Now, we all know there are limitations and challenges with the fiscal health of the state and all of that whatnot. But I want to pose this question to each of our panelists. If you all had a magic wand and could get the next governor of California to do one thing in order to advance wealth responsive financial aid in California, what would that be? No particular order either.
I'm happy to go first because this one's pretty easy for me. Because the one solution that I would propose would be a supplemental aid award for duly disadvantaged students in our state, which we have a model for. We've done this for other vulnerable populations, and I'd really like to see us enact this change.
I'm happy to go next. I think enacting some type of statewide affordability pledge that takes total college costs into account and also prioritizes the lowest income students. I mean, ideally we'll get to a day where we can provide, enough financial aid for everyone. But I think that one of the things that, I've talked about over the years is there's a difference between making it easier for someone to go to college versus making it possible in the first place. And so, I think there's been a lot of promising movement in recent years, great strides in increased financial aid applications and, investments such as in the Community College Expanded Entitlement Cal Grant. We're seeing borrowing rates decline at CSU and UC, which is fabulous. But a lot of the stories are what lie beneath the overall averages. And we see a lot of inequities by race and ethnicity and by family income. So I think being able to, I would say to this governor that, being able to look at what are the more nuanced stories besides the kind of overarching headlines, and how can we then use that data to finally craft a statewide affordability pledge.
Yeah, my brain goes everywhere because I think of financial aid as an ecosystem. But I think what comes to my mind is like potential. California has so much potential, and rightfully so. And that potential will always remain untapped unless there's action, right? We are often so reactive in the higher education space. Financial aid, in particular, moves at the speed of bureaucracy rather than at the speed of equity. So if I can have one wish, is like just be proactive about this particular topic in regards to including wealth, because the research is there, other sectors include it, and yet for whatever reason, the financial aid space has not. Like, why shouldn't it be California to be one of the first states to lead this charge, especially with just the vast amount of wealth, but also just the vast amounts of wealth gaps within our state, which are actually larger than the national average. So I think my magic wand would be proactive about this particular topic. Don't wait for it to be in crisis mode.
Well said. And what a way to round us off and close us out. But once again, folks, I want to thank all of our panelists here. Uh, Laura Hamilton, Laura Zabakubits, Jaime Ramirez Mendoza. You all are awesome. You all are phenomenal. Thank you for sharing this space. It's been an honor to facilitate this. And the recording of this webinar will be live and shared as well after this. Big shout out to Manny, who has been behind the scenes working really hard to make sure this webinar goes as smoothly as it has. So if you all are watching this in recording format, feel free to continue the conversation and the dialogue. This is just the start. So get in touch with us, reach out to any one of our organizations, and we look forward to continuing to engage with you all. But thank you to our panelists again. Thank you for our attendees for joining us today.
And thank you, Parshan.